Feinstein, who's to my right here, who were the prosecutors on this case. They're also available to answer any questions, and Mr. Marcum will make a brief statement after you hear from the prosecutors.
Okay. Good morning. My name is John McCarthy. I'm the state's attorney for Montgomery County. Yesterday, a jury returned a verdict in State versus Jorge Landeros, currently age 55. Mr. Landeros was living and lived predominantly in Juarez, Mexico. He was both a dual Mexican and United States citizen. He was found guilty of second-degree murder of Sue Marcum. Ms. Marcum, the victim in this case, a professor from American University, was 52 years old at the time of her death. I'm honored to be joined by her brother, her only sibling, and members of her broader family and friends. The verdict came at the conclusion of an 8-day trial. Trial in this matter was held before Judge Rachel McGuckian, a circuit court judge here in Montgomery County. The jury was out for a few hours yesterday before they returned their verdict. They began their deliberations actually yesterday, despite the fact the trial ended the night before, but they didn't begin deliberating until the next day. The sentencing in this case is set for February the 6th, 2006. The defendant faces 30 years, which is maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This case stems from events that go back to October the 25th, 2010, when Sue Marcum was found dead in her home at the 6200 block of Massachusetts Avenue in Bethesda. Cause of the death was blunt force trauma and strangulation. The police, during the course of the investigation, quickly established that the defendant in this case was an individual with whom Sue became acquainted as a yoga instructor and a Spanish instructor. Their relationship went beyond that at some points in time into a romantic relationship, and also led to Sue beginning to do investments through Mr. Landeros. During the course of the time that Mr. Landeros was handling Sue's finances, she lost a total of $312,000. We believe that financial records show, and this was presented to the jury, that the defendant actually directly took $252,000 from her that he stole. Correspondence in the year leading up to her death and into the months leading up to her death revealed that Sue realized very quickly, despite the fact that, and this is true of any good con man, and the defendant was a con man, she continued to have faith in his abilities to invest her money. But she was concerned because she was getting IRS dunning notices from various banks. There was no money in the account. She remortgaged her homes. She borrowed from her retirement funds, and still the money was disappearing. Evidence at the crime scene developed that around the victim's neck, a liquor bottle that was used to bludgeon her, under her fingernails, and also near 2 shot glasses that were found in the kitchen, was found the DNA of Mr. Landeros. Now, in order to get Mr. Landeros' DNA, he was going back and forth regularly for years between Juarez, El Paso, and various areas in the United States. As a matter of fact, at some point in time, once he was charged in this matter, there was a phone call that was made by a Washington Post reporter, Dan Morris, known to many of you, where he asked the defendant whether or not he was in the United States in October when the murder occurred, and he lied to that reporter, and that reporter testified during the course of the trial because the border records that we obtained during the course of this trial reflected that he had come to the United States and was in the United States during October when this murder of Sue took place. The last time that Mr. Landeros came to the United States and crossed the border legally was in 2011. In 2011, and in 2011, the border guards there in cooperation with Montgomery County Police, took a buccal swab from him and obtained his DNA. Now, this is a man who traveled back and forth, and extensively we put into the record the documents that shows that he was regularly traveling back and forth from Mexico to the United States. The defendant never came back to the United States again once his DNA was obtained, because that DNA linked him in the various ways I've already described to the crime scene where Sue Marcum lay dead. I've apologized to the family that we had to wait 15 years. I talked to Alan upstairs because this has taken 15 years for us to get to this point. But it was a difficult process. He stayed in Mexico. He was not located until 2022. We were notified. We filed the appropriate. We had already filed notifications, but they didn't locate him for almost 11 years. And then he was extradited back here to the United States. And he came here in July of 2023. There were a couple of additional continuances in the case. They were based on the defense requesting a continuance. The state was ready to go forward. And then the matter finally for them went to trial, and he was found guilty yesterday, after a relatively brief deliberation for a case that was this lengthy. For those of you who are present, again, I think we saw a reflection of the fine work that's done every day on behalf of the men and women who live in this community by the Montgomery County Police Department, homicide detectives. Larry Haley testified in this case as a detective I've known for a very, very long time. I think he testified for 11 hours in this trial. One individual, I don't know that I've ever heard a single detective testify for 11 hours in a case. And Detective Paula Hamill, who took that case on after Larry left homicide, two exemplary homicide detectives who do fine work for us every day. I want to congratulate them for what they did to help bring this case to justice. I will also say, if anybody of you had the opportunity to witness the extraordinary work that was done by Ryan Wexler, who's my deputy, and Debbie Feinstein, who heads my special victims unit. These are two extraordinary women who did a magnificent job piecing together this case after 15 years. Like many criminal cases don't get better. It's not like a fine wine. They don't get better with time. And sometimes it's very difficult to put these cases together. These two women did an extraordinary job. And I think, and I will say quite candidly, knowing the facts of the case, I think the jury came up with a perfect verdict. It is clear from the crime scene that these two individuals, where there had been this tumult over financial stuff, were sitting down drinking together before the murder began. There was DNA and there was evidence that they were sitting there having drinks. And then, again, because of the financial tension that existed, it erupted in something that led to Sue's death. So may I say we respect very much the trial that we were given by Judge McGuckian. I think the work that was done by the jury in this matter, it was completely understandable to me. And I think it is a perfect verdict based on the facts in this case. And we will be arguing for a profound sentence against the defendant when he goes to sentencing in a couple of days, as I mentioned earlier. I'm now going to turn it over to Alan Marcum, who is Sue's brother, who has some brief remarks for you concerning the family's feeling about the verdict. Alan.
Thank you, John. It's been a long week and a half and a longer 15 years. On behalf of our family, my sister's colleagues and friends, and Sue's students, thank you to the Montgomery County Police, Larry, Paula, Frank. Thank you to the FBI and to the Mexican law enforcement authorities. Thank you to the state's attorney's office, especially Debbie Feinstein, Ryan Wexler, and their team. It is impossible for words to express my gratitude deeply enough.
We'll take any questions. Get Bob.
Johnny, for you, Debbie or Ryan, do you believe Mr. Landeros went there to legitimately teach her Spanish? Was he a con man from the moment that was what he was intending to do, was to eventually steal her money?
Again, I think that they had known each other for a number of years. I think their relationship went through stages, and they met in 2005. They met in 2005, so they had known each other for 4 or 5 years. This was not something that happened in the course of months. It happened in the course of years, and so the nature of their relationship changed over those years. There were times when it was yoga, times when it was Spanish, times when it was romantic, times when it was financial. Look, they also had, and I didn't mention this earlier, they had taken out insurance policies and named each other as beneficiaries. During the course of the trial, you would have heard testimony that they actually tried to get, $1.5 million policies. They reciprocal $1.5 million policies where each, if one died, the other would get $1.5 million. The insurance company wouldn't even sell them that policy. They said, wait a minute, you don't have an insurable interest here that requires a policy that large. They were able to get $500,000 policies, and so at the time of Ms. Marcum's death, in addition to the money that was already stolen, there was the potential that would be another $500,000 that the defendant would get because he was the named beneficiary on her life insurance policy.
Did he ever try to act on that?
There were phone calls made. He never made an official claim.
Could I ask to the assistant state prosecutor, when you first heard first-degree murder not guilty, what were your thoughts at that point?
Our thoughts were, please let second-degree murder be guilty. For sure. I mean, we knew and discussed in closing arguments that for a layperson to understand that legally premeditation can literally occur in between gunshots and can occur in between blows, we knew that was legally the accurate description and path for this case. But we also certainly understand, given the facts and given the nature of the struggle and the ultimate murder, how the jury came to the decision that they came to.
And you felt that they, in the end, concluded that he did not have an intent to kill when he got there, that it was more a crime of passion?
I'm not sure. The elements that are different between first and second degree murder are premeditation and deliberation. But it still requires intentional and willful behavior. So I would think that they believed that it was intentional and willful what he did, that it was his intent to kill her. That's what the law requires. But whether he came there with that plan is a different question. Whether he came here with that plan on that night or was all part of his larger scheme and scam, we don't know. And I would add that, and Ms. Wexler and I talked about this in our openings and closings, that when he met Sue, he had found a mark. He had found someone that was vulnerable to his charms, and she wasn't the only one.
The defense had said that this case was about choices, and that, with all due respect to Sue, who's brilliant and loved and wonderful, they were implying that she made his choice, and that you can't rob her of her agency. But she was a brilliant woman who might have also, like so many people, fallen prey to someone like this, and that can happen to anyone. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely, and we see this all the time. So as John mentioned, I am the chief of our Special Victims Division, and we handle cases involving exploitation related to vulnerable people, and also many cases where there's a power and control dynamic. And the reality is, in these circumstances, it can affect anyone. The person who to everyone else was the most strong-willed and outwardly successful person can be the same person that behind closed doors is experiencing financial exploitation, physical abuse. We see that all the time with domestic violence. And the reality was, in this case, that Sue's family and friends, they did not know about the financial exploitation. They did not know that he was sort of using this power that he had over her to get her money. And that's really what he had. She described in her own words, and this was part of the testimony, that she was enamored by him. And she also related that, and that was what her friends felt. They didn't quite understand, but they felt that she was enamored by him and would really do anything for him. And it's sad and tragic, but it really could happen to anyone, even the most strong-willed, fantastic person that Sue Marcum was by everyone's account, her family, her many friends, what a good friend, what a giving person she was, and how she gave to the community. She volunteered, won service awards, and you wouldn't expect it. And that's exactly what someone who is trying to exploit another does. They find someone that on the outside no one would know, and the fact that they weren't going to tell anyone, which she didn't. Literally no one knew about the exploitation.
It might be impossible to know this, but do you believe Sue was in the process of trying to break up with him or threatening to turn him in?
We don't know exactly what happened on October 25th, 2010. Maybe, and we said that in court as well, maybe there was some sort of confrontation. Maybe he asked her for more money and she literally had nothing left to give. Or maybe she stood up for herself, for really the first time, because what we can see in her email correspondence is that even while her portfolio was declining, her money was disappearing, she still was expressing faith in him to be successful with the investments. He really had won her over and she believed in him. So we don't know. We don't know. All we know is that at some point he attacked her, and you can see the trail of her blood and hair leading down the stairs to her ultimate lying place at the bottom of the steps with that broken glass under her. He had clearly hit her, the glass shattering under her, and then she went down, and he strangled and continued to beat her.
Can you speak to your this case went on for 15 legal years until a guilty verdict was reached? Can you speak to what message this sends to other families who are waiting for justice?
We're never going to stop. The police aren't going to stop. There was continued investigation over the years. Our office is committed to seeking justice for people, and it doesn't matter the passage of time. And I would say this for anyone who's experienced something alone, for example, sexual abuse and child abuse, come forward. We stand ready to try to hold criminals and people that do awful things accountable for what they've done, regardless of the passage of time.
For the state's attorney, can you just clarify or explain how this is a perfect verdict when, the jury had the option to go first-degree murder?
Well, may I say, I think it's a perfect verdict because I understand the difficulty, having done this for over 40 years, of explaining the concept of premeditation to a jury. I also understood the facts of the case. I do not believe that facts suggested that Mr. Landeros went to that home that night with the premeditated idea that he was going to end the life of Sue Marcum. I don't think that's, I think that the fact that if you read the crime scene and you see that they apparently were involved in having a drink together, they had poured drinks, and his fingerprints were on the glasses. So it suggested to me that two people who had at some point in time had romantic relationships were sitting, as some adults do, in the privacy of a home, having a drink. Now, we know that prior to that evening, there had been ongoing correspondence that Sue was becoming increasingly concerned about her finances and her depleting monies. And there had been these ongoing conversations. And while she did, as Debbie mentioned, she still cared for this guy. He was a pretty good con man. This is how con men operate. Look, one of the things we've not even talked about so far is even after this happened, one of the ultimate cons that was set in action was he staged a burglary. And we've not even talked about that. He staged a burglary to make it look like someone else had broken into this house. And I think the way that this case was examined and the way the physical evidence was presented, and the jury basically put the lie to that. There was no burglary. There was a murder, and then the killer changed the appearance of the crime scene to take the attention away from him. So may I say, when I say it's a perfect verdict, look, would we have welcomed the verdict of first-degree murder? The answer is yes. As a strict matter of criminal law, would it have been sustainable and would it have been upheld on appeal? The answer is yes. But as a common-sense person who's tried a lot of these cases, and I know how people think, this case was not where somebody came over with a weapon premeditatedly and took the life of another human being. They were sitting there clearly having a drink, talking to each other, and something happened. We could only think, we surmise, maybe with some good reason, that it might have been about the finances because they've been fighting and arguing through emails about that. And the thing blew up, and it happened.
In reading the emails, which are very devastating when you see her point of view, to me it seems like when she wrote, I recall it something to the effect of, you were sitting at the end of my dining room table and basically saying, I don't care about who gets hurt. I have no remorse. Did you feel that that was like a moment for Sue? Would that be a moment for her, do you think? A turning point in any way?
I think that Sue was really conflicted, and I think from her emails it was true that that had existed for a long time. So I think what Debbie was saying before, that until her death, I think she truly, absolutely cared for him. And she wanted to think the best of him, and from everything I've learned about Sue Marcum as a person, she wanted to think the best of people. So that was really consistent with who she was. I think that there were some moments, as you said, in her emails where she clearly was starting to understand that this was for him about money, and that her caring for him didn't really mean that he truly cared for her. I think that when Mr. Landeros went to her home on the 24th, you know, as we've all talked about, I don't think that he had a plan to end her life, but I think he had a plan. And I think his plan was consistent with how he'd always treated her, that he went there because he wanted money that he no longer had because he had gotten rid of it, he had spent it. And he was going to walk out of there having succeeded in whatever way possible.
And Ryan, for those of us who weren't in court, unfortunately, has he ever shown any remorse for this person
No.
who cared for him?
No, not that we saw.
Can I also add an additional fact? By the date that Sue was killed by him, now based on the jury verdict, he was married to somebody else. He had married another younger girl. Now, whether that came into the conversation that night, I don't know. But we knew there was, and I'm not sure that, I don't know that Sue even knew that. But I don't know if that, but he was married to somebody else.
In Mexico or here in the States?
Mexico.
No, the wedding was in El Paso.
Well, okay, but she was in El Paso.
She was Mexican.
She was Mexican, his wife was Mexican.
Could you talk to us about the break in the case, when it's discovered that Mr. Landeros is in Guadalajara, living under another name, working as a yoga instructor there? How is that discovery made? And then from your perspective, what did it mean to finally have the man that you've been searching for so long?
Well, obviously, we had extradition papers that had been filed for over a decade. We didn't begin our efforts to try to get him out of Mexico in 2022. We began that effort immediately. 2011 was probably when we began that effort. So, you know, that was 11 years before that. So once we realized there was a coordination, Mexican authorities, the FBI, Department DOJ, all cooperated with us in making sure that the documents were properly served, and they were that we had all the notices that we needed to get an international extradition done properly. Look, we've done this before in other cases, and then he was sent back to us. But it took about a year to, even from after they had him in custody. It still took a while to get the documentation together to get him back here.
Was it the Mexican authorities who spotted him at first, FBI, or?
Yeah.
It was a civilian.
Civilian.
In his
Civilian
yoga class. She had seen a TV show that most wanted. Someone in Mexico had seen. There were several different national stories here that were done by different outlets, America's Most Wanted, and I think some others, that someone in Mexico had seen his picture and had recognized him as her yoga instructor.
And Debbie, can you tell us when the DNA swab was taken at the border of him?
March 2nd, 2011.
Do you know the specific date?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Approximately.
Was that done because, and did he then realize, oh, I'm a suspect in Sue's death, I'm hightailing it back to Mexico and never coming back?
That's what it certainly appears to be. Essentially what happened was the police had been following other leads related to the burglary, and when the initial DNA was tested, it came back with an unknown male source on the shot glass, the fingernails, and the bottle that was found under her body. And those sources were all the same. And that was really, as Detective Haley, now Sergeant Haley, testified, that was kind of the moment when the police realized that this was a person that was unknown at the moment, but they were going to do everything they could to find out who that was. And that's when they saw the border control records, saw that Landeros had crossed into the country. That's when they learned about the emails that had been exchanged between the defendant and Ms. Marcum. That's when they dove deeper into the financials, because he was always on their mind because of the life insurance policy that was found at the time of the initial crime scene investigation. But more pieces kept coming together over the course of the investigation, kind of culminating in this unknown DNA source, and then the sort of plan to try to get him to give his DNA, which ultimately he had crossed into the country legally in early March, and the El Paso Police Department interceded and asked him for consent to get his DNA, and he did agree, which is frankly consistent with someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else.
And was he told this is because of?
He was told.
That
He was.
you're a suspect
Yeah.
in the case?
No, he wasn't told that he was a suspect. He was told that this was being investigated and that providing his DNA would be helpful.
Debbie, could you please explain in people speak, to those of us who aren't scientists or lawyers, the 2023 advanced testing? I really want to be able to explain that as accurately as possible. So could you tell me what weight you put on that and what did it tell you as prosecutors and investigators?
So I think Ms. Labasco could do a much better job, who is our DNA forensic analyst. But in 2011, one of the items of interest, her fingernails, there was a major contributor, which was Sue Marcum, as you would expect, and then there was a minor contributor that was unknown. They couldn't identify who the minor contributor was. And then advanced testing and really advanced statistical analysis and a computer program in 2023 allowed them to narrow it down to the defendant. And then, frankly, I would say I wouldn't say it more significantly, but equally as significantly, there was unknown, and actually, did I misspeak? Yeah, I misspoke. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Strike that. Sorry, I misspoke. He was a minor contributor to the fingernails. He was a minor contributor to the fingernails in 2011. Let's talk about the neck, because that was the piece where there was the unknown DNA, even once we had the defendants, because the profile that they developed, the minor profile they developed on the neck, wasn't one that had a high enough level. And then what they were able to do is they asked, and Detective Haley, Sergeant Haley, had made this happen, that the DNA was brought to another lab, Bodhi Technologies, who we contract with, who could do a DNA analysis called YSTR, Y for the Y chromosome, which is the male chromosome. So what it looks for is DNA that's consistent with a person or any paternal member of their family. So their father, their son, their grandfather would have the same Y DNA, the same male DNA. But what it was able to do was to narrow down that male DNA minor contributor to the defendant, or one of his relatives, which made no sense, obviously, that it would be one of his relatives. So that was a critical advancement and really answered, as Sergeant Haley said, answered kind of that last piece of the puzzle.
Would you think that was what really sealed the deal for the jury members, is having that piece of the puzzle be answered?
Do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
I mean, I would say, since the beginning, we've always said that really the DNA evidence, not just the neck, but that everything relating to her death was connected to Landeros. So it was not only on the murder weapon, but it was on really a secondary murder weapon, because we believe he used his hands to strangle her, and he left his DNA on her neck in that method, and the DNA under her fingernails was because she was trying to escape. So and that all matched again with the shot glasses. It made sense. Everything came together, and there was no alternate explanation that would explain why the defendant's DNA was in all of those places.
Is the IRS notice
It's not, I don't think it's a fake. It just, that's a whole world that we didn't kind of go down. I think, and as the judge said, it was really the effect that whatever it was had on Sue Marcum and her mindset and how really upset and concerned and anxious she was leading up to her death.
Mr. Markham, we appreciate you appreciating the work that they did. Could you mind just telling us about your sister?
That's one question I'll take. Because I answered that on the witness stand. That picture was taken about a month before she died. That was in my parents' backyard near Syracuse, New York. She'd driven up there for the weekend. I was there. I'd come out to visit my folks. Sue came up. She's holding a plate of grilled eggplant from her garden, and she was very proud of that. We grilled that, had that for dinner. We parted company. That's the last I saw of her. You see her friends, her colleagues. You don't see all of her students here. Sue taught me by understanding how she worked with her students, the difference between a good teacher and a great teacher. And a great teacher cares more about what their students learn than they care about what they're trying to teach. And Sue cared ultimately about what her students learned, to the point that person after person after person has told me that taking her class changed the course of their careers and turned them into accountants. Now, I took an accounting class in college. Look, to me, it's boring. Sue managed to make it interesting with Don's help, but Sue managed to make it interesting to the point that her students cared about accounting and changed the course of their lives. On the record are her volunteer accomplishments and her relationship with my wife and our kids. That was my sister.
Could you expound on that relationship with your children? I know they adore her.
I think for now I've said enough. Thank you.
We're gonna call it, guys. Thank you all so much. Any factual questions, I'm happy to answer after.
Oh, sentencing. Can someone speak to sentencing?
February 6th.
No, not the date, but what you expect in terms of how long.
We'll deal with that at the sentencing, after the sentencing.